My name is Chris Rechsteiner. I'm the VP of Marketing at Deft. And on behalf of Avi and Eric and Jordan and Matt, we're delighted to be here today with you. And I'm going to do my best to moderate, or at least attempt to moderate, what should be what I think is a fantastic discussion. There's some really smart people that are going to be taking on a very serious topic and something that people don't necessarily have their heads around. That's the impact of resilience and really the requirements of resilience in the public cloud, what you need to do to make sure that it is and you remain operational. So with that, what I'd like to do is welcome Avi Freedman, who is the founder and CEO of Kentik, Ericdienowski, the CSO at Deft, Jordan Lowe, the CEO at Deft, and Matt Levine, the CTO and founder at CacheFly. And I'm going to hand that over to Avi for a brief introduction. Avi.
Thanks, Chris and Ron. Hi, I'm Avi Freedman. I go back in the infrastructure to the late 80s when I found an empty T1 at Temple University. And when I was getting ready to leave, there was no way to buy dial-up access. So I started the first ISP in Philadelphia. And so I've been in the mix of networking, compute storage applications since then. I was VP of engineering at AboveNet, which was a large hosting company back in the late 90s. Joined Akamai for 10 years. It was a CDN. Worked with Deft when it was Server Central on the cloud side, and about 8 years ago started Kentik, which is the network observability company. So we look at networking and up to with a view towards the application, whether it's routers and switches or cloud VPC flow logs or eBPF and Kubernetes, try to bring that into the observability space. We are a SaaS company. We run hybrid. We run our own infrastructure in Equinix and in public clouds. And our hundreds of customers are in, we have some that are all cloud. We have few that are no cloud, but some that are more on-prem, and most live in a hybrid world. So a little bit about me.
Awesome. Eric, you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Avi. My name is Ericdienowski. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer here at Deft. Like Avi, have a broad and deep background in the technology space, probably dating back into the mid-90s, from experience in the pharmaceutical space, hedge funds, and then starting a company that helped customers adopt AWS, migrate into AWS, and begin to use it more like it was intended, an API-first platform rather than just virtual servers. Did that for a few years and then joined Jordan to build what is now Deft, and we're helping customers across the board from public cloud to co-location services to a broad range of managed services from databases and storage and security products and things like that. So a wealth of experiences to talk about and ideas to share as we jump into this.
Awesome. Jordan?
Hello, everybody. I'm Jordan Lowe, the CEO and one of the founders of Deft, which we mentioned formerly known as Server Central and Turn Group. Eric gave a great background on the company. We've got lots of customers from all over the board, from hybrid, all cloud, on-prem, mixed, multi-cloud, all the fun buzzwords we've heard so much about today. But we're excited to chat today about all the fun topics. So
excellent. Matt?
Hey everybody, my name's Matt Levine. I'm the founder, CTO at CacheFly. We're a CDN. Arguably, maybe CDNs are clouds. Maybe we'll get into that. Maybe we're not. But in any case, we run infrastructure in about 63 markets around the world. And one of the things we help our customers with is navigating, getting traffic in and out of their various origin infrastructures, cloud infrastructures, serverless infrastructures. So we see a little bit of everything.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in there. We have a handful of questions that we identified to sort of guide this discussion, and please feel free to take it anywhere. And anyone participating, if you have questions, drop them into chat and we will weave them in immediately and get as clear and detailed an answer as we possibly can. So to start off and at least sort of put some shape around the story for this, many environments today are either in a hybrid state or being architected towards a hybrid state. And as they head that direction, it increases the amount of complexity for everyone involved, and that's IT, business, end users, customers, what have you, right? The level of complexity is just up, +1 + n. So when companies choose this direction, what are the first steps that they have to take to begin to develop a successful strategy? And how do you take into consideration the fact that there are going to be public cloud outages that must be addressed as part of that reality?
It's a big one.
I think that,
oh, go ahead, Avi.
I'll take it. I think that you really need to look at the dynamics of the application, right? For something that's always on, it might be a better candidate for, on-prem or dedicated hosting, or, for something that's very bursty and seasonal, it's going to be better for cloud. We see very few single applications that are actually hybrid, as in multi-cloud. Some more that are, sort of DR to or from on-prem, to cloud. But I think it really comes down to, which cloud, which infrastructure you uses, what are the communications, data, and in the cloud, are there added services around, AI, ML, and things that you need that particular cloud has. And then we see decisions being made based on that. And then to the second part, that's where it gets really interesting is, really building for resilience. The cloud doesn't do that for you automatically. It actually is just as hard or harder. You just need to plan it and do it and not forget about it once we've migrated it up. Yeah, we'll get to that. That's later in the plan, because remember, cloud is just other people's infrastructure software with strange names that you can't debug the way you're used to. So.
Well, I mean, that's an important point. I want to hit on that, Eric. You've mentioned this before, and I've heard you mention it, and that's the sense that there's a belief that there's automatic resilience in the cloud because it is the cloud. And unfortunately, that isn't remotely true. So when you take that into consideration, what do you need to look at? Where do you need to start to recognize that you're at the mercy of something much bigger, and as Avi mentioned, much more complex than that you might have sitting in your own data center?
Sure. I think that the things to consider are probably not necessarily that different than the things you might consider if you're running, on-prem or even in a hybrid situation, right? The questions that you have to go through and the things that you need to contemplate are probably very similar. The first hurdle to get over is those assumptions, right? And to even be aware that you're making those assumptions. We run into so many customers that think that, if I put my workload in the cloud, it will automatically scale, it's automatically backed up, it's automatically split between data centers and all these sorts of things. And in more cases than not, customers are completely unaware that maybe they're running single threaded, they're running out of a single AZ, and then there's an outage and they're surprised. The other piece that we run into is that they don't really understand where their single points of failure are. So we have a lot of customers that maybe are split between multiple availability zones, but somewhere within their stack, there's a single point of failure that's going to take them down. So doing some sort of analysis of the entire stack and looking at, is the entire thing redundant and highly available across the board? The other piece that I would build on a little bit what Avi said too is, considerations, for a hybrid architecture. Every customer that we work with considers a hybrid architecture for different reasons, right? In some cases, we're talking to customers about cost. And they want a hybrid architecture because they want to put their steady workload, in a more affordable situation, right? But they still want to retain burstability and flexibility, or they want to still retain access to a unique service that one of the cloud providers offers, like maybe an AI offering or access to GPUs or something like that. We have other customers that do it for performance reasons. They just, maybe they have certain kinds of workloads that are completely unpredictable, and they need the ability to scale on the fly and choose to put some of that stuff in the cloud. There's other customers that do it for disaster recovery purposes, right? That's where they're going to ship all their data. It's a completely different provider, different hardware, different locations. So I think understanding the why will have a huge impact ultimately in what that architecture ends up looking like. If you're just doing it for DR, maybe a 2-hour outage is acceptable. If you're doing it because of performance, maybe a 2-hour outage is absolutely not acceptable. And those designs are going to look very different.
Yeah, and I would just chime in first to what Avi mentioned, which is, the cloud is just other people's infrastructure. The important thing to remember too, as a tenant of that infrastructure, unless you are very startup-y, the pace of change and complexity that's happening on your underlying infrastructure is probably a lot faster than what your app does or the rest of your organization. And Chris sort of hit on earlier, and complexity is what is going to cause problems and outages and things. So even when you're in steady state, and in a hybrid world, your on-prem infrastructure might be in steady state. In that cloud world, there's a lot of things happening to get the bits to your bits to your instances, or to share data between your disk infrastructure. All of that is not the same steady state that we sort of perceive and we've modeled for on-prem infrastructure. I've deployed the SAN, therefore the SAN isn't changing. That's not really how it works in the cloud. In the cloud, there's more commits than we would all probably like to know to that code base. So your steady state infrastructure, right, is really not steady state at all. And the flip side is, though, as the clouds increase that complexity, the chances of you being on any one of the instances that's affected by some sort of small outage becomes less and less. So you get a little bit of insulation from that, but that's why we see when the big outages happen that take down everybody, that's usually because complexity has gotten it's become a lot more complex to operate that underlying service than it was 5 years ago.
And Matt, can I ask you a question? Do you think when a customer has an outage in a public cloud scenario, do you think accountability should lie with the public cloud provider, or do you think it should lie with the customer for not designing a solution to account for resilience?
Well, I think that's a tough question to answer in broad strokes, but I think you hit on something earlier when you were talking about how you design that infrastructure, which is, as long as it's happening because of one of the trade-offs you agreed to make when you designed the architecture, then nobody should be blamed. This was the trade-off you were willing to make in order to gain something else. If it's something that was foreseeable, but you didn't foresee it in your architecture, it probably lies with you. And if it was something that you foresaw and you did, quote unquote, all the right things, and then one of the underlying things in the cloud provider caused all of the right things to not work, then the buck tends to stop with them, I would think. But like everything else, it's so nuanced and it's so different, based on the tenant. But you certainly, if you are not having a conversation about what trade-offs you're willing to accept by going with, say, one availability zone or two availability zones in the same region, internally, the dialogue you're having with your coworkers and your boss and everybody involved with the architecture, everybody should have agreed in advance of what you're willing to accept for fault tolerance, because it's like the security trade-off. You can be secure 100%, but the costs are so astronomical to be fully redundant in the cloud, right. fully redundant to all possible. It wouldn't be possible to run a business based on that. So somewhere along the way, you're making trade-offs, and that's why the hybrid conversation is important, because that's one of the trade-offs you can make, is say, okay, I can have some over here, some over here. Why am I putting that there? What am I willing to live with? And then over here, what am I willing to live with?
So Matt, you're making a great point. And what that Eric started with is, what's the difference between disaster recovery and that redundancy, resiliency, building stuff across lots of different availability zones, building all those backups and DR things in there. It's a business decision is what it is. And a lot of these companies, they might make a business decision that says, you know what, if Amazon goes down, some people are going to be down. They're just going to be like, oh, we can say, oh, Amazon was down. Okay. And, depending on the type of company you are, if you're a big company that people don't really understand that you could have done something differently, people are okay with that. And if your business is okay with being down for a few hours, and the cost, as you said, can be astronomical for large applications to really be fully redundant, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. That's really a business decision, and you got to decide what's the pay, what's the cost.
One of the decisions that we've started asking and talking about with our customers is there a competitive advantage? And if so, what is the value of being available when your competitors are down? Mm-hmm. And vice versa. So when you're, if you can make the argument, well, everybody was down. Everybody it was in US East was down. So, well, we lost the same amount of money of our competition. Okay, but somebody who wasn't architected that way might have had an opportunity to capture a ton of upside there.
So we had one question that came in that I want to weave into this because I think it starts to get into that idea of prioritization and really that they are comprehensive decisions. And the question is specific to disaster recovery for workloads in like GCP or AWS. What works well in the most generic scenarios? Is it best to have a service that is from the provider, so from GCP, AWS, or Azure, or are there solid multi-cloud DR solutions that should be considered and can be put into place when you are in that multi or hybrid environment?
This is a tough question because
So-
without knowing much about the application, it's hard to kind of be perspective here. Avi, we're going to say something.
So we may have different views on this. I'll give you my view. I think it's really hard unless you are religiously using the clouds like their constituent components. This is compute, this is bandwidth, this is a gateway, this is storage with a common API yourself. And even doing Kubernetes, which is not that simple, and using the Hashi stack doesn't get you all the way there. Like, unless you're really religious that all the infrastructure looks the same, it's really hard to do multi-cloud, HA for sure, and even DR, depending on what you're looking for recovery time. If you just want to back up your data and metadata and say, I could put this back up, sure, that's very easy. We do that. Generally though, we say each of these major public clouds is reliable enough across their entire infrastructure that DR to a very different, not just availability zone, but region is really pretty safe. Then you've got the same parameters. And then as Jordan said, you just need to make sure you don't have, sort of single points of failures. Now in a DR mode, that's again easier because you can be running in a couple of availability zones over here, more proximal to whatever the CDN, the users, and then switch over. So I would say really it's advanced juju to do different cloud, and you really need to have a substrate to manage. But multi-cloud, a single cloud, not really all that hard, especially if you can do HA. And then if you want extra credit, back up the actual data and metadata in case just something disastrous happens. But realize the cloud will probably be back up before you could do anything with that data. You're really it's the rainy day dystopian fiction world where you're actually going to have to use it.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm going to steal words out of Eric's mouth there, and you can probably back me up better on this. But I mean, staying on the same cloud is so much better. Doing multi-cloud is hard. All of this, guys. First of all, just backing up big picture here. All this depends on the capabilities of your staff, the capabilities of who's managing these applications, the capabilities who's running them. Obviously, whatever people like to be, multi-cloud and be able to fail over between Google and Amazon and everything. Great, yes. But I mean, truthfully, like Avi just said, both Google and Amazon offer amazing tools to be resilient on their infrastructure that are going to be better and probably more reliable than trying to do it yourself and trying to do one of those crazy multi-cloud situations. Unless you're at a scale that's pretty ridiculous and you need it. These services are great. Like there really are very good database services. They're very good, resiliency services that are going to get you what you need. And you have to decide if that's good enough, right? I mean, you can use other third-party tools like Zerto things to kind of keep VMs in sync across different clouds, things like that. But realistically, it's not. Really depends on how much is that worth it to you? Is that worth it to your business?
I think Jordan. One thing too. I think we've been talking about all of this probably under one significant assumption, which is that we're talking about one workload, and we have a lot of customers that will have 5 workloads or 10 different workloads, and one workload might be in AWS, one workload might be in one of our facilities, right? And and those customers are still considered hybrid to a certain degree. So again, when you're making those decisions about DR and things like that, you can start to look at it or look at your enterprise stack across the board and what are you putting where and how are you balancing your risk that way. The other comment I'd make, to Jordan and Avi's point too, is that if you're thinking about should you use the cloud's services or not, or should you roll your own thing and then maybe stand it up inside of an EC2 instance or a container or something like that. As you start to adopt hybrid, and if you want to split a single workload, across all these different providers, you end up essentially reducing yourself to the least common denominator, which means that you're excluding all of the proprietary services that all the other cloud providers offer. And if this comes back to that question of why are you using these cloud providers? And if, one of those is features or some unique performance characteristic that they have, because you're using autoscalers or something like that, it's going to be really difficult to scale your workload across multiple providers if you're using any of those proprietary features.
Yeah, and one of the lowest common denominator features you reduce yourself to, especially talking multi-cloud, well, now you're limited to picking one or multiple of those clouds to manage your traffic between the other one, be it DNS or be it something higher up the stack. And you are now relying on, let's say, your ability to monitor inside of one cloud from the other, as opposed to its native load balancing services or its native availability services. And even that becomes infinitely complex to sort of maintain, as Avi mentioned, as things go over time. And you can try and outsmart it and go, well, we'll just do DR and manually failover. Amazing, until in the middle of the outage, your cloud provider starts rejecting DNS API calls. And you can't update to your DR thing because your primary DNS service was provided by somebody that's now rejecting your update queries, which has never happened in the real world, of course. So that's from the outside looking in, you guys touch this on a more direct level than we do. Our job is just to steer things around. But in talking with customers, and by the way, everybody's gets a lot more loose-lipped as soon as there's an outage. Once there's an outage and once people start reviewing things, they kind of get to the point where they go, I can't mitigate everything, which goes back to what we talked about, which is you need to know the trade-offs of like, you know what, if I can't update my DNS because the cloud provider's DNS is down, back to your question, Eric, I've done everything right. It's not my fault.
You do have to not stop at being single availability zone, single region. Like that's, you do have to not stop there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But there's diminishing returns for sure on the business level of giving up all of those non-lowest denominator services. If all you're buying is compute and storage, today you are taking up such a small percentage of the value chain in any of the public clouds. You're back to like, well, if that's all you're going to buy anyway, you might as well just do, DR with 2 colos, because all you're buying is, basic services that you can probably provide for yourself for cheaper. You only truthfully start getting some ROI once you move up the stack and you go, okay, this is making our lives so much easier because AWS or Google or Azure or any public cloud is doing this heavy lifting. That's freeing up my team to do these other things. But if you're just buying bare bones services, it's very tough to capture a return other than, well, I did a stamp of approval on we had to move to the cloud, and I have done so, and therefore things are good.
Well, I think it raises an interesting point too when you talk about the lowest common denominator, though, because at some point in time you have to be paying attention to everything that's going on. You have to be monitoring it. You have to be looking at what your observability strategies and tools are going to be across this. And you mentioned the lowest common denominator, and I think that holds true as you get into the more sophisticated aspects of the stack and of the environment. Is how do you begin to observe truly hybrid environments without just looking at the lowest common denominator? What do you need to do? What do you need to have in place to make that a reality? Because at some point in time, what someone is going to ask you and say, what is our observability strategy? What are we observing? Why are we observing it? Are we observing anything, right? Like you can't throw something without hitting observability today in the IT world. So that's going to come up, and now where do you take it?
I think it's a great point, Chris, because if you are truly hybrid and spread across multiple platforms, it means you can't leverage the observability tools that the cloud providers give you. And in many cases, they're all very good, but they're all very, proprietary and tightly integrated with their platform. So if you've got stuff sitting in, your local data center and you need to do, distributed tracing, you're not going to have an easy time doing that, on top of AWS or Azure with their tooling, since it's not necessarily designed to integrate well with that stuff. So you end up then essentially creating another workload that you have to manage. It's independent of the cloud provider. So I think to that point, and then the second piece of it is, if folks are thinking about, where they want to put things and why, another aspect that we talk to a lot of our customers about is what is the maturity of the workload. And what I mean by that is it a product or an idea or a system that you're in the early phases of developing and giving shape to, or is it something, that it's been around a minute, it's, maybe carrying the work for 100 million users, right? And this goes back to Matt's point about, are we just talking about like the commodity services like compute and storage? If you have a highly mature service or platform and it's got all those users on it and it's running on, just compute and storage, those turn into good candidates to put back, into a colo facility. However, if you're just beginning to iterate on something, you need a lot of flexibility. You don't know what the specifications are going to be. You don't know what the performance characteristics are. Those are good opportunities where you're still leveraging the public cloud. So anyway,
yeah.
In most cases, you can probably take maturity literally.
Yeah.
Right? Like in most cases,
Right.
if it's less than 2 years old, you've probably been developing it in the cloud on the tooling, and that's different than your workload that your company's been running for 25 years, and now you're trying to figure out how to.
Yeah, lots of unknowns.
Yeah, let's talk on the skill set for a minute on that. The skill set to get that workload into or out of the cloud is not easy. Like the amount of training and keeping up to date on all these, you guys mentioned earlier, we talked about how actively, Amazon, Google, everyone are building all these different applications and software and tooling you can use just to keep up to date on the 300 things, Amazon announces every month is challenging. It really is hard to keep up and know all, even know what's the best version of this tool or this application or this tool set to use to kind of have this running most optimally and most cost effectively and the fastest on these platforms. Yeah. So having your staff up to date is a huge challenge.
And even not just related to public cloud. Look at what's going on in the open source world. Look at how many different projects right now are being sponsored and actively developed by the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. Important projects that are very relevant to a hybrid infrastructure because, those are projects and applications and utilities that are being developed that, really promote the idea of having, a cloud agnostic infrastructure. Just keeping up with what they're doing and having a team that is, familiar with and competent in just the language of the product names, it would be a huge step.
And it's also a challenge because, as I said, this is just, I describe it, for people coming from the network world, everyone's interested is infrastructure as code, right? And GitOps on that. And so cloud is just other people's infrastructure as code with funny names and bugs that you didn't write and things that fail, like distributed systems, not like single routers and switches and stuff. And the training collateral, the material, the courses are more weighted towards people that aren't trying to map all the concepts they understand about full stack. It's more for, I'll just say, the developer and application and SRE that comes from that side. And so it's actually not ridiculously hard, Eric, other than, as you said, like all the names, but the training collateral, if you want to reskill or just like get people broader, is not designed for, okay, cloud network, it's just, tunnels, policy, ACLs, like it's just that. It's just that peering, like it's just that. Here's this and that and that and that. It's start at the high level. It's like, learning BGP was when I got in the 90s, it was all self-referential. So I think that's also something that we as the vendors, need to fix. And I don't see the major cloud providers, doing a good job of that. So that's something we're always on the lookout for our customers. And even as we hire and train people.
Yeah, Jordan, right. I have a question for you because this might be something you've thought more about. I hadn't considered this, but, I've always thought about the positive leverage and ROI you get out of continually leveraging more and more of the new services that the cloud providers are adding. Is there a negative ROI when your staff just isn't staying up to date? Like, can you be going backwards if the cloud is moving forwards and you're staying in the same place?
It's definitely a challenge. You've got a team of people that they've got to do their day job, take care of our customers, keep up to date and everything. It's challenging. I think there's a lot of I guess I'd almost say specialization in the things people are tracking, depending on what applications and what we're doing on the cloud. Like if we're doing a lot of DNS, is there changes to Route 53 on Amazon? All the kind of classic situations there. That's a good question. I mean, for example, some of the big uses that we see our customers use is on the AI and ML side. So we have a couple of customers that do pretty significant hybrid work with both Amazon and Google on the GPU side. So, with those guys, keeping up, and it actually ended up, being a lot more of our customer, the customer engineers as well, learning about the latest stuff. But I mean, those are kind of the really fast moving kind of parts of those businesses and that are working really well. They have all these really cool features and all these really good ways to do it. I mean, it's not, and it's also a really good burstable thing to kind of run get 5,000 GPUs for 10 minutes, turn them all off. I mean, it's the same discussion we had, years ago. It's like, oh, yeah, wait, you guys are doing all, remote desktops. So people only logged in 8 hours a day. We only have to pay for a third of our bill to run these remote desktops. So I was like, yeah, pretty much. That's great. And it's the same thing with the GPUs. But, back to your point, I mean, it's a challenge. I would tell you it's definitely hard to keep, have enough people to keep up to date in all the products. And there is a point where you need to specialize and decide which parts of these products, which parts of these businesses are you going to, attach to.